Hello, friends and adventurers. I'm M, and today I want to tell you about how to have a monster that will actually scare your players. Welcome to the DM table. Sometimes you want a monster to scare your players, and yet you want them to fight it. You don't want them to run away necessarily. You just want them to feel that this is a scary monster that they're fighting, that it's gonna be challenging and dangerous and gruesome and deadly. And yet, with experienced players, this is kind of hard to achieve. After all, they've fought hundreds of different monsters. They are all but immune to the excitement of something new and monstrous creeping up to them. But we will fix it so that they can get scared from a monster, yes. First and most basic thing to achieve this is to know that adventurers and players are afraid of the unknown, and not in the general sense, mind you. It's more that if you think about it, if you were really there, if you are really there and fighting things for your life, well, what are you afraid of the most? You're not really, as a professional, you're not afraid of things that you kind of know what they are and what they do, even if they are gruesome and deadly and frightening. You are afraid of one day making a mistake, of stumbling onto something that will do something you haven't expected, that you will make a mistake of not knowing what it is, and that it will cost you your life, your character, your whole progress up to that point. It'll just end you, and you didn't know what it was because you didn't know about it. It was something new and you didn't react appropriately. And well, because role players have characters that don't get to save their position, they are indeed more invested about not losing them. After all, they are unique or close to it. So, in this situation, they feel kind of the same like the aforementioned professional adventurer, where they are much more worried about things that might do something to them rather than the things they know they can face that will do something to them, interestingly enough. If you simply have, say, a Minotaur, and that Minotaur is described as a deadly towering beast, or a Minotaur approaches your party down the corridor, it swings his axe on a soldier nearby, chopping his head clean off. That is technically gruesome, deadly, and intimidating and monstrous. However, most players won't be afraid of that. However, if you have a monster that is a strange alien thing, crawling along, approaching down a corridor, and has a spike protrusion instead of its head, then your players start paying attention, more so than if it's just a tough foe. But if it succeeds to hit somebody, and you describe it as the tip of its forefront acts almost as a syringe. Quite so, injecting visibly through its clear membrane at the tip something of a clear liquid into you. If this happens and your players are the ones that got to be injected, even one of them, now they're worried, now they're afraid. Even if this was completely cosmetical and completely not dangerous, not deadly, not anything, they will, because of the lack of the ability to find out what it is, and it looking so cryptic yet gruesome, they will be worried. They will be worried that something, some part of this alien thing that has a syringe for a head that's made of biological stuff that just injected them with something that's part of its strange and bizarre self and is now inside them, causing an effect. And this series of unknowns is what will make your party panic. But that is not all. For another thing, you should not directly do as I did and describe things as gruesome and disgusting and so on. Why? Because I was illustrating. And one thing, well, the other thing you should do is describe sufficiently without the terms that will give your players clue what you think. Because as soon as you say that something is ghastly and gruesome or frightening or scary, they'll know what you want them to think, and they'll remember that they are playing with you and that, they'll think that's what he or she wants us to think. And then they won't, because they'll remember to be a bit more immune, shall we say. So, as long as you describe things matter of fact, but in a sufficiently descriptive manner, yet you're not giving away really hints of your tone too much, nor of your intention, as long as you're not too direct with your words, they, as in the previous example, as long as you remove those keywords, they won't know immediately, and that's enough of a shock to get them to skip thinking about that part and start thinking about the more worrying part then. What is it that DM is thinking at the time? Which is maybe the most worrying part to some parties, but still. So remember to frame it appropriately. You can avoid direct conclusions you make and let them make crazy conclusions of their own. You can say that the creature is something that looks quite like a human body, lies at the end of the corridor. It seems featureless, yet bare. It seemingly is missing the head, and yet the head is not chopped off. It simply is not there where it should be on a human, and this bare, naked body with no descriptive things on it, just shakily, incessantly crawls towards your group. It shivers as if sick, and stumbles occasionally on its four limbs, crawling along as if some sort of an animal, not something that almost resembles a human corpse, albeit featureless. That's a description that didn't specifically say what was off, but just from the start, if you have said that something looks like a body, the players expect a corpse or a person that collapsed there and might still be alive. When you describe that it's bare, naked, and yet featureless, they skip across the initial shock and go to the second stage of shock, where they are wondering why is this bizarre, hideous thing there. Then when you mention it hasn't got a head, they start imagining that it's something gruesome. Yet, when you describe that the head is intentionally missing, you're creating more of a bizarre scenario. Now they are actually not knowing what to think, and this is what created the unknown. It's an intentional unknown. They can feel that they don't know how to face this thing. And this activates the fear from the beginning that I mentioned. Now, when the thing starts crawling shakily towards them as if it's sick, then they worry even more, because something that is supposed to be their opponent, something that is supposed to overpower them, something that is supposed to beat them in physical activity, is not supposed to look like it's sick and failing to even walk, and yet it does. This creates a double layer of uncertainty and unknown, and of fear of things that they are not prepared to face. So that is how you will scare your veteran party. They'll just see this sort of thing and they'll get worried. And once it does something that they further didn't want it to do to them, even if it's a small success that doesn't do pretty much almost anything in combat, even if it's a smallest of injuries, if it's described in a sufficiently open manner, shall we say, as I said, not deliberately gruesome, but open to interpretation enough manner, and mysteriously enough, yet not too vaguely, they will get more and more frightened by the action, by the moment. For example, think traditionally what people do wrong, if they want this effect. They describe a monster, say, spitting acid on an opponent. And if you wanted to frighten your party, instead you would say that the creature spews quite a large gulp of some sort of mysterious greenish liquid that, as it hits the opposing creature, its flesh just slogs off and falls to the floor as if a waterfall surrounding it. Its skeleton collapsing no sooner after. How about that? If you don't say or show that this was acid before and the dungeon isn't thematic enough for them to guess, even if it's obvious, when they just suddenly witness this scenario and then the creature starts approaching your party, well, what do you think they're gonna react? They're gonna think that this is some sort of crazy, insane insta-death move or close to it. They don't wanna part with their flesh, and this is the only difference between normal acid attack and normal acid attack described more vividly because they don't think about it if they trained for it, if they prepared for it, if they are ready for it, if they thought about it before. But if they see it with fresh eyes, they're gonna think about it now. And before they remember to intelligently catalog it under something, they'll see what it is when it's nothing that they've seen before. So use that. And finally, as we've begun, so we should finish, whenever something is supposed to progress frighteningly, it's supposed to be somehow too invasive, too intimate, too undisclosed yet personal, so that those who are invested feel like they want to be invested in an opposite direction. So if you have a monster that is attacking them for physical damage, instead of saying that the person is wounded, you can say that a piece of their skin comes off. You know, torn away, clean, or whatnot. Now, they are gonna ask you and they're gonna describe it, but do play a bit of this game with them before. You don't have to do it long. An initial shock is enough, especially if you did the other steps. So if the monster has a status effect or does something else, well, whatever it does, do the acid thing. Describe it with fresh perspective and then let them guess until you answer, but initial moment will be enough, and especially if it's something that they cannot easily discover. It's a mode of attack that they don't have a detection to really confirm what it is, and they don't have means to be absolutely certain. Sure, they can guess, but you don't have to tell them if it's not mechanically relevant and is fine, as in the encounter is completely solvable as they are and what they are doing, and you're not misleading them per se. You're not barring their progress or tripping them along the way, telling them different solution. No. Just as long as, per se, the emphasis is different enough, then they are only going to be guessing. You just need to prepare so that it doesn't really affect the encounter in a negative way. For example, the initial example was where they get injected with something, but that something might not be really that crucial to defeating them. So no matter how they react, they will need to fail this as a normal encounter for them to completely fail. That's one way to assure that they won't be, per se, against this sort of thing, but there are many other ways. As long as you're making sure that you're clearly enough not tricking them once all is said and done, as long as you can present it as a thing that happened, then they can enjoy how they fought a tough monster and barely fought it off, because who knows what it did. And yes, the original example is good for this, because if you let them get stabbed and injected with something and they don't find out what it was for months on end, think how they'll look for it, think how they'll react, think how they'll behave. They'll always remember with utmost terror that monster that did something that they are unable to solve to this day, worrying every day what it might be, what it might have done to them, what it is that they are modified by. Because even if it just didn't do anything, they feel like it has changed them irrevocably, and that is something that only the most incredible monsters can do. So, as long as you can keep it in suspense without breaking any rules and without too much of leading them on, as long as it's all by the book and as long as it's all by the fair play, well, that does take some touch of knowing how to corral people into trusting how to play further, but that is another lesson for another day, so that's how you frighten your party. If you thought this was a unique adventure, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next and perhaps every week. Until then, I wish you luck on your adventures, as scary as they may be. So, see you again soon. Bye.